Welcome to Big Breaking News of America. Genesis Episode 15. Broader cultural and religious impact of the Primeval history. The Primeval history, Genesis 1:11, is among the most influential texts in human history, serving as a theological and narrative cornerstone for the Book of Genesis and the Torah, while exerting a profound impact on global religious traditions, cultural expressions, and ethical thought. These chapters address universal questions about creation, human nature, divine sovereignty, sin, judgment, mercy, covenant, and diversity, offering a mythic yet accessible framework that resonates across cultures and epochs. From the ordered creation of the cosmos, Genesis 1, to the dispersion of nations at Babel, Genesis 11:1-9, the Primeval history provides archetypes, Adam, Noah, the Ark, the Tower, that have shaped Jewish identity, Abrahamic faiths, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and secular culture. Its engagement with ancient Near Eastern traditions, exilic context, and interpretive richness has ensured its adaptability, influencing theology, liturgy, art, literature, philosophy, science, and social movements. In modern times, Genesis 1:11 informs discussions on environmental stewardship, human rights, multiculturalism, and ethical innovation, affirming its enduring relevance. This exploration examines the Primeval history's impact on Jewish tradition, interfaith contexts, global culture, and contemporary issues, highlighting its role as a foundational text that bridges ancient wisdom and modern challenges. 1. Impact on Jewish tradition. The Primeval history is the theological bedrock of Jewish tradition, shaping its theology, liturgy, ethics, and communal identity. As the opening chapters of the Torah, Genesis 1:11 are central to Jewish scripture, study, and practice, providing a narrative and ethical framework that permeates Jewish life. Theological foundations. Creation and divine sovereignty. Genesis 1:2 establishes God's sovereignty as the sole creator, affirming creation's goodness, and God saw that it was good. Genesis 1:10, and humanity's role as God's image bearers. Genesis 1:26-27. This theology underpins Jewish monotheism, distinguishing it from ancient Near Eastern polytheism, and shapes beliefs about God's authority and humanity's purpose. Sin and repentance. The fall, Genesis 3, introduces the Yetzer Hara, evil inclination, framing human responsibility and the need for teshuvah, repentance. The spread of sin, Genesis 4:6, and God's merciful judgments, for example, Cain's mark, Genesis 4:15, Noah's preservation, Genesis 8:1, inform Jewish theology of moral accountability and divine compassion, central to Yom Kippur and Mussar, ethical, literature. Covenant and continuity. The Noahide covenant, Genesis 9:8-17, with the rainbow as its sign, is the Torah's first explicit covenant, promising creation's preservation. It sets the stage for the Abrahamic covenant, Genesis 12:1-3, reinforcing Jewish theology of divine faithfulness, emunah, seen in Brit, covenant, rituals like circumcision. Cultural impact. These theological themes shape Jewish thought, from Maimonides' rationalism to Heschel's emphasis on divine-human partnership, ensuring Genesis 1:11's centrality in Jewish philosophy and education. Liturgy and ritual. Genesis 1:11 is integral to Jewish liturgy, with Partiio Bereshit, Genesis 1:16:8, and Noach, Genesis 6:9-11:32, read annually in synagogue cycles, engaging communities through Torah study and sermons. Creation, Genesis 1, inspires Barakot, blessings, for natural phenomena, while the Sabbath's roots in Genesis 2:1-3 make it a weekly celebration of creation's order. The flood narrative, Genesis 6:9, and its covenantal renewal influence Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur prayers, which emphasize judgment, mercy, and renewal. The rainbow, Genesis 9:13, is a liturgical symbol of hope, cited in blessings for natural signs. The genealogies, Genesis 5:10, and Babel, Genesis 11:1-9, underscore human continuity and diversity, reflected in prayers like Avo, which trace Jewish ancestry to the patriarchs, linking universal and covenantal histories. Cultural impact, liturgical engagement ensures Genesis 1:11's vitality, fostering communal identity and ethical reflection, from synagogue readings to Chevruta study. Ethics and communal identity. The Primeval history's ethical norms, sanctity of life, Genesis 9:6, moral responsibility, Genesis 4:7, and respect for creation, Genesis 9:1-7, inform Jewish law, halakha, particularly pikuach nefesh, saving a life, and Baal tashchit, do not destroy. The tension between cultural achievements and sin, Genesis 4:17-22, inspires ethical innovation, seen in environmental and social justice movements. The universal scope of Genesis 1:11, encompassing all humanity, underpins Jewish ethics of inclusivity, for example, Jerto Shav, Leviticus 19:34, while the transition to Abraham, Genesis 11:10-26, reinforces Jewish identity as God's chosen people, seen in naming practices and covenantal rituals. The narrative's emphasis on tikkun olam, repairing the world, rooted in creation's goodness and covenantal hope, drives Jewish advocacy for peace, justice, and environmental care, exemplified by organizations like Hazan. Cultural impact. These ethical principles shape Jewish communal life, influencing education, philanthropy, and social activism, ensuring Genesis 1:11's role as a moral guide. Education and study. Genesis 1:11 is a cornerstone of Jewish education, studied in day schools, yeshivas, and adult learning programs. Its narratives engage diverse audiences, from children learning about creation to scholars analyzing its theology and structure. The text's ambiguities, E.G., the serpent's identity, Genesis 3, Enoch's fate, Genesis 5:24, the tower's purpose, Genesis 11:4, foster Chevruta, partnered study, and debate, a hallmark of Jewish learning. Rabbinic texts like Bereshit Rabbah deepen its study, offering ethical and theological insights. Cultural impact. Educational engagement ensures Genesis 1:11's transmission, shaping Jewish intellectual tradition and communal discourse across generations. 2. Impact on interfaith traditions. The Primeval history's universal themes and archetypal narratives have profoundly influenced Abrahamic faiths, Christianity and Islam, fostering shared theological and ethical frameworks while inspiring interfaith dialogue. Its resonance in these traditions extends its cultural and religious impact globally. Christianity. Theological influence. Genesis 1:11 shapes Christian theology, particularly doctrines of creation, original sin, and redemption. The creation accounts, Genesis 1:2, affirm God's sovereignty, influencing Trinitarian theology and liturgical celebrations like Easter, which echo creation's renewal. The fall, Genesis 3, underpins the doctrine of original sin, for example, Romans 5:12-21, framing Christ's redemptive role as the second Adam, 1 Corinthians 15:45. Narrative resonance. The flood narrative, Genesis 6:9, is a type of baptism, 1 Peter 3:20-21, symbolizing judgment and salvation, while the rainbow, Genesis 9:13, is a sign of divine grace, cited in Christian hymns and sermons. The Tower of Babel, Genesis 11:19, informs reflections on pride and diversity, with Pentecost, Acts 2, seen as its reversal through the Spirit's gift of tongues. Liturgy and art. Genesis 1:11 permeates Christian liturgy, from creation psalms, for example, Psalm 104, to Advent readings anticipating redemption. Its imagery, Eden, the Ark, the Tower, inspires Christian art, from Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel frescoes, creation, flood, to medieval manuscripts depicting Noah's Ark. Ethical impact. The sanctity of life, Genesis 9:6, and human dignity, Genesis 1:26-27, inform Christian ethics, influencing social teachings on justice, charity, and environmental care. The Universal Covenant, Genesis 9, supports Christian missions, emphasizing God's love for all nations. Cultural impact. Genesis 1:11's influence on Christianity shapes Western religious culture, seen in theology, liturgy, art, and ethics, from cathedral iconography to modern Christian advocacy for human rights and creation care. Islam. Theological influence. The Quran echoes Genesis 1:11's themes, with parallel accounts of creation, for example, Surah Al-Baqarah 2:30-39, the Fall, Surah Al-A'raf 7:19-25, the Flood, Surah Hud 11:25-49, and human diversity, Surah Al-Hujurat 49:13. These affirm Allah's sovereignty, human responsibility, and divine mercy, aligning with Jewish monotheism while emphasizing submission. Islam. Narrative resonance. Figures like Adam, Noah, and the dispersion of nations are central to Islamic tradition, with Nuh's story reinforcing prophetic obedience and divine judgment. The Quran's emphasis on human unity and diversity, Surah Al-Hujurat 49:13, parallels the Table of Nations, Genesis 10, and Babel, Genesis 11:19, fostering a universal ethic. Liturgy and culture. Genesis 1:11's narratives influence Islamic storytelling, seen in Qisas al-Anbiya, stories of the prophets, and ethical teachings, emphasizing charity, zakat, and respect for creation. Its imagery resonates in Islamic art, from calligraphy depicting creation to mosque decorations symbolizing divine order. Ethical impact. The sanctity of life and moral responsibility, rooted in Genesis 1:11's echoes, inform Islamic ethics, influencing laws on justice, family, and environmental stewardship. The universal scope supports Islamic outreach, promoting peace among nations. Cultural impact. Genesis 1:11's influence on Islam fosters shared Abrahamic values, seen in Islamic literature, education, and interfaith initiatives, contributing to global religious culture. Interfaith dialogue. The Primeval history's universal themes, creation, sin, covenant, diversity, provide common ground for interfaith dialogue among Jews, Christians, and Muslims. Shared narratives, like Adam's creation and Noah's flood, facilitate discussions on theology, ethics, and social issues. Interfaith initiatives draw on Genesis 1:11 to address contemporary challenges, such as environmental crises, creation care, human rights, sanctity of life, and multiculturalism, diversity. Organizations like the Parliament of the World's Religions cite these narratives to promote peace and cooperation. Cultural impact. Interfaith engagement extends Genesis 1:11's influence, fostering mutual understanding and collaborative action, from theological symposia to joint social justice projects, shaping global religious discourse. 3. Impact on global culture. Beyond religious traditions, the Primeval history has profoundly shaped global culture, influencing literature, art, music, philosophy, science, and popular media. Its archetypal narratives and universal themes resonate across cultures, ensuring its enduring presence in human expression. Literature. Genesis 1:11's narratives inspire literary works across genres, from epic poetry to modern novels. John Milton's Paradise Lost, 1667, reimagines the fall, Genesis 3, exploring sin and redemption, while Lord Byron's Cain, 1821, delves into Cain's rebellion, Genesis 4. Modern authors, like Toni Morrison, Song of Solomon, draw on the flood and Babel for themes of survival and identity. The narrative's archetypal imagery, Eden, the Ark, the Tower, provides universal motifs for exploring human nature, ambition, and divine encounter, seen in works from Dante's Divine Comedy to Ted Chiang's Tower of Babylon, 1990. Etiological elements, like the origins of death, Genesis 3, or languages, Genesis 11:9, influence mythopoetic literature, shaping global storytelling traditions from Greek myths to African oral tales. Cultural impact. Genesis 1:11's literary influence enriches global literature, providing timeless archetypes that resonate in novels, poetry, and drama, from classical to contemporary works. Art and visual culture. The Primeval history's vivid imagery inspires iconic artworks, from ancient to modern times. Medieval Christian art, like the Genesis mosaics in St. Mark's Basilica, depicts creation and the flood, while Renaissance masterpieces, such as Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel frescoes, portray creation, the fall, and the flood with theological depth. Jewish art, constrained by anachronism, uses symbolic representations, like illuminated Haggadah depicting creation's order, while Islamic calligraphy reflects Genesis 1:11's themes of divine unity. Modern artists, like Marc Chagall, reinterpret Noah's Ark and Babel in vibrant, universal terms. The imagery of Eden, the Ark, and the Tower permeates global visual culture, from religious iconography to secular illustrations in children's books and museum exhibits. Cultural impact. Genesis 1:11's visual legacy shapes global art, influencing religious and secular aesthetics, from cathedral frescoes to contemporary installations, ensuring its cultural ubiquity. Music and performing arts. Genesis 1:11 inspires musical compositions, from classical oratorios to modern genres. Joseph Haydn's The Creation, 1798, sets Genesis 1 to music, celebrating divine order, while Benjamin Britten's Noé's Flood, 1958, dramatizes the flood narrative, engaging diverse audiences. Jewish liturgical music, like Piyutim for Rosh Hashanah, draws on creation and covenant themes, while Christian hymns, for example, All Creatures of Our God and King, and Islamic nasheeds reflect Genesis 1:11's universal praise of creation. The narratives influence theatre and dance, from medieval mystery plays depicting the fall to modern ballets exploring Babel's dispersion, embodying themes of unity and diversity. Cultural impact. Genesis 1:11's musical and performative influence enriches global culture, fostering emotional and spiritual engagement through sound and movement, from sacred to secular contexts. Philosophy and intellectual thought. The Primeval history shapes philosophical inquiry, addressing existence, morality, and human nature. Jewish philosophers like Maimonides, Guide for the Perplexed, interpret Genesis 1:11 to reconcile faith and reason, while Christian thinkers like Augustine, City of God, use the fall to explore sin and grace. Enlightenment thinkers, like Rousseau, engage Genesis 3 to discuss human society's origins, while existentialists, like Kierkegaard, Fear and Trembling, reflect on Cain's rebellion and human freedom. Modern philosophers, like Levinas, draw on the sanctity of life, Genesis 9:6, to develop ethics of responsibility. The narrative's universal questions: why do we exist? Why is there suffering? Resonate in secular philosophy, influencing discussions of anthropology, ethics, and cosmology. Cultural impact. Genesis 1:11's philosophical influence shapes global intellectual traditions, fostering dialogue on human purpose and morality, from ancient academies to modern universities. Popular media and entertainment. Genesis 1:11 permeates popular media, from films to television and video games. Movies like Noah, 2014, reinterpret the flood narrative, blending biblical and cinematic elements, while the Bible series, 2013, dramatizes creation and Babel for broad audiences. Children's media, like animated Noah's Ark stories, simplifies Genesis 1:11 for young viewers, while video games, for example, the Telos Principle, use Edenic and Babel motifs to explore creation and technology. The narrative's imagery and themes appear in advertising, comics, and social media, reflecting their cultural ubiquity and adaptability to modern storytelling. Cultural impact. Genesis 1:11's presence in popular media ensures its accessibility, engaging diverse audiences and reinforcing its cultural relevance in a digital age. 4. Impact on science and education. The Primeval history has significantly influenced scientific discourse, educational curricula, and public understanding of human origins, shaping debates on cosmology, anthropology, and ethics. Science and cosmology. Genesis 1's ordered creation has historically influenced scientific inquiry, with medieval scholars like Aquinas integrating it with Aristotelian cosmology. The narrative's emphasis on creation's goodness inspired early modern scientists, like Newton, to explore natural laws as divine order. The tension between Genesis 1:11 and modern science, particularly evolution and cosmology, has sparked debates, with creationist movements citing Genesis 1 literally, while progressive theologians, for example, Teilhard de Chardin, interpret it metaphorically, aligning with scientific findings. The flood narrative, Genesis 6:9, influences geology and archaeology, with some seeking evidence of a global deluge, while others view it as a regional flood myth reflecting ancient Near Eastern traditions. Cultural impact, Genesis 1:11's influence on science fosters dialogue between faith and reason, shaping public discourse on origins and the universe, from academic journals to popular science media. Anthropology and linguistics. The genealogies, Genesis 5, 10, 11, 10, 26, and Table of Nations, Genesis 10, inspire anthropological studies of human migration and cultural development, informing research on ancient populations and genetic diversity. The Tower of Babel, Genesis 11:1-9, provides an etiological framework for linguistic diversity, influencing linguistics and the study of language origins, from comparative philology to modern sociolinguistics. Cultural impact, Genesis 1:11's anthropological and linguistic influence enriches academic fields, contributing to global understanding of human history and diversity, seen in textbooks and documentaries. Education. Genesis 1:11 is a staple in religious education, studied in Jewish day schools, Christian seminaries, and Islamic madrasas, fostering theological and ethical reflection. Its narratives engage students through storytelling, art, and discussion, from primary to higher education. In secular education, Genesis 1:11 is taught in literature, history, and comparative religion courses, offering insights into ancient Near Eastern culture, narrative structure, and universal themes. Its inclusion in curricula promotes cultural literacy and critical thinking. The text's accessibility, vivid stories, archetypal imagery, makes it a versatile educational tool, engaging diverse learners and fostering interdisciplinary study. Cultural impact, Genesis 1:11's educational role ensures its transmission, shaping intellectual and moral development across cultures, from classrooms to public lectures. 5. Impact on ethical and social movements. The Primeval history's ethical teachings and universal scope have profoundly influenced social movements, shaping global approaches to human rights, environmental stewardship, and social justice. Human rights and dignity. The declaration that humanity is created in God's image, Genesis 1:26-27, and the sanctity of life, Genesis 9:6, underpin Jewish, Christian, and Islamic teachings on human dignity, influencing global human rights frameworks, such as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, 1948. The Primeval history's emphasis on moral responsibility, Genesis 4:7, and divine mercy, Genesis 9:8-17, inspires advocacy for justice, equality, and compassion, seen in Jewish tzedakah, Christian charity, and Islamic zakat. The universal scope of Genesis 1:11, encompassing all nations, Genesis 10, supports efforts to combat racism, xenophobia, and discrimination, with religious leaders citing these narratives to promote inclusivity. Cultural impact. Genesis 1:11's influence on human rights shapes global policies and activism, from anti-slavery movements to modern refugee advocacy, reflecting its ethical legacy. Environmental stewardship. Creation's goodness. Genesis 1, and the Noahide covenant's inclusion of all creatures. Genesis 9:10. Inspire Jewish and global environmental movements. Jewish organizations like Hazan cite Genesis 1:11 to advocate for sustainable agriculture and climate action, emphasizing Baal Tashkit. Christian environmentalists, like the Evangelical Environmental Network, draw on Genesis 1:26-28 to promote creation care, while Islamic scholars emphasize stewardship. Khalifa, Surah al-Baqarah 2:30, rooted in Genesis 1:11's echoes. The flood narrative, Genesis 6:9, serves as a cautionary tale of ecological disruption, resonating in modern discussions of climate change and biodiversity loss. Cultural impact. Genesis 1:11's environmental influence shapes global sustainability efforts, from religious eco-theology to secular conservation campaigns, ensuring its relevance in addressing ecological crises. Social justice and multiculturalism. The Table of Nations, Genesis 10, and Babel narrative, Genesis 11:19, affirm humanity's unity and diversity, inspiring Jewish and global advocacy for multiculturalism and inclusion. The 70 nations symbolize completeness, promoting respect for cultural and linguistic diversity. The critique of pride, Genesis 11:19, and sin's consequences, Genesis 3:4, informs social justice movements, addressing systemic arrogance and inequality. Jewish thinkers, like Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, cite Genesis 1:11 to advocate for a dignity of difference. The Universal Covenant, Genesis 9, supports interfaith and secular efforts to build peace among nations, seen in initiatives like the United Nations Cultural Heritage Programs. Cultural impact. Genesis 1:11's influence on social justice and multiculturalism shapes global policies and activism, fostering unity amid diversity in pluralistic societies. 6. Contemporary relevance and applications. The Primeval history remains a vital resource for addressing contemporary issues, its themes and narratives offering wisdom for navigating modern challenges in ethics, culture, and society. Ethical technology and innovation. The tension between cultural achievements and sin, Genesis 4:17-22, resonates in debates on technology, from AI ethics to genetic engineering. Jewish ethics, rooted in Baal Tashkit and moral responsibility, Genesis 4:7, guide discussions on responsible innovation. The Tower of Babel's critique of pride, Genesis 11:19, warns against unchecked technological ambition, informing secular and religious reflections on digital culture, surveillance, and automation. Cultural impact. Genesis 1:11's insights shape ethical frameworks for technology, influencing policy, education, and public discourse on innovation's societal impact. Globalization and cultural identity. The Primeval history's affirmation of unity and diversity, Genesis 10:11, addresses globalization's challenges, offering a model for balancing cultural identity and global cooperation. Jewish and interfaith leaders cite these narratives to promote dialogue in multicultural societies. The dispersion at Babel, Genesis 11:19, inspires efforts to preserve linguistic and cultural heritage, seen in UNESCO's language preservation programs and Jewish initiatives to maintain Yiddish and Ladino. Cultural impact, Genesis 1:11's relevance to globalization fosters cultural exchange and mutual respect, shaping international policies and educational curricula. Crisis and resilience. The flood narrative cycle of destruction and renewal, Genesis 6:9, resonates in discussions of crisis response, from natural disasters to pandemics. Noah's obedience, Genesis 6:22, offers a model for leadership and hope, inspiring religious and secular resilience strategies. The Primeval history's emphasis on divine mercy and human continuity, Genesis 5:9, informs psychological and communal approaches to trauma, seen in Jewish pastoral care and global humanitarian aid. Cultural impact, Genesis 1:11's insights into resilience shape crisis management, from faith-based relief organizations to secular disaster response frameworks. Education and public engagement. Genesis 1:11's accessibility makes it a powerful tool for public engagement, from museum exhibits on ancient Near Eastern culture to documentaries on human origins, for example, PBS's Genesis, A Living Conversation. Its narratives bridge religious and secular audiences, fostering dialogue on shared human concerns. In academic settings, Genesis 1:11 informs interdisciplinary studies, from theology and literature to anthropology and environmental science, encouraging holistic approaches to global challenges. Cultural impact, Genesis 1:11's role in education and public engagement ensures its continued influence, promoting cultural literacy and ethical reflection in diverse contexts. 7. Synthesis, Genesis 1:11 as a global cultural and religious touchstone. The Primeval history, Genesis 1:11, is a global cultural and religious touchstone, its narratives and themes shaping Jewish tradition, Abrahamic faiths, and secular culture across millennia. In Jewish tradition, it provides the theological, liturgical, and ethical foundation for halakha, teshuvat, and tikkun olam, ensuring its centrality in communal life. In Christianity and Islam, it informs theology, liturgy, and ethics, fostering shared Abrahamic values and interfaith dialogue. Globally, its archetypal imagery and universal questions inspire literature, art, music, philosophy, and media, enriching cultural expression and intellectual inquiry. Its ethical teachings, sanctity of life, moral responsibility, diversity, underpin human rights, environmental stewardship, and social justice, while its contemporary relevance addresses technology, globalization, and resilience. Rooted in ancient Near Eastern traditions and shaped by the exilic context, Genesis 1:11's adaptability ensures its enduring impact, bridging ancient wisdom and modern challenges. As the Torah's prologue, it frames humanity's story as a divine-human partnership, offering a vision of creation's goodness, redemption's hope, and diversity's unity. Thank you for watching Big Breaking News of America. Make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell icon for more news updates. Share our channel with your friends and family members. Leave a like for more videos and express your thoughts under comment section.